So that brings us to the main event of this evening. Our green theme presentation for February. We're very pleased to have Christine Spitzley, the Chief Environmental Planner at the Tri-County Regional Planning Commission, presenting on the new Tri-County Water Policies and Programs Guide. Thank you very much for coming to speak this evening. We look forward to your talk.
Well, thank you very much. I'm going to take you back to the beginning, not quite this far back to the beginning, but to give you really kind of a perspective on why we did this project, I wanted to show you where we've been in the Tri-County region, especially in the urban area. So this is Michigan, Tri-County Regional Planning Commission, sits right in the middle, right in the palm of your hand, and it comprised of Clinton, Eaton, and Ingham counties, and we were established in 1956. So in 1956, this is what we were watching on television. This is the era that we were talking about. And that was when Tri-County started to consider water resources from a multi-jurisdictional perspective. This was the beginning of water quality planning. It was pretty rustic and pretty bad, and we just started to have these discussions. And on the days that I feel like we haven't accomplished anything, I go back and I look at these pictures and I feel slightly better. These are some of our original 208 water quality program and planning that we did, and these are some of our first meetings. I don't know if you can see in that picture, but there's a lot of ashtrays on the table. We hadn't gotten to air quality yet, but this was the basis for all of the programming that we have in place today. So that gave us this huge study. We had about 5 linear feet of reports that came out of the 70s and early 80s. And out of it, the big recommendation was that we needed a groundwater management plan and some kind of board or an entity to implement proactive drinking water protection. So this was the original plan, and I stuck this in there because you can see East Lansing and Meridian are right smack dab in the middle of it. And so your communities have always been leaders in drinking water protection and water resource planning. That took us about to this era in our time. And so, we started with all of the family, and we had all of these spin-offs, and we've done really similar things in our environmental planning, especially in water. So this is the Groundwater Management Board, and if any of you caught the township board meeting last night when Clyde Dugan spoke, he would be the gentleman in the white sweater with the navy V-neck around it. So in 1982, we started our Groundwater Management Board, and that is comprised of a dozen municipalities around the greater Lansing area, including Michigan State University, who pay dues to Tri-County Planning to do water quality planning and water resource planning as a whole. So we have a technical advisory council. We've done some major studies, and I'm just going to tick through these really quick just because sometimes I think the only one I was here last time I was here was maybe Ned. So a lot of you are new to this, and it just gives you a quick background. So we did a water regionalization project, and back in 1988 we started that, and it really looked at what water resource infrastructure we had in place, what water towers, what pipes, what treatment facilities did we have, and what were the expectations that we were going to need based on population projections through the year 2020, which seemed like a really long time ago then. And probably 60 or 70% of that study has been implemented. We did not see the population growth that we thought we were going to, but I think we have 14 municipalities that are interconnected now. So that really made for some interesting discussions that led to actual projects. We also have an aquifer study that USGS has been our partner on since 1969. We've updated it 3 times now. We use that to model the aquifer in this region. So we can model if you want to put in a new municipal well, if you wanted to put in a large industrial park, USGS can take this model and predict with some pretty good accuracy what would be the impact on the surrounding area. Do you have enough water available, and what the natural water quality is. The model has also been used in reverse, and it's able to predict where contamination plumes are going to go based on current pumping scenarios at various water utilities and large water users. So we've used it quite a bit, and we continue to update it. It's also the basis for our wellhead protection delineations. So we've got a pretty good assessment of our water infrastructure we had for 20 years. We had some really good opportunities for shared systems. We saved a lot of money not building infrastructure we didn't need. If an adjacent community had infrastructure, they were able to make linkages instead of building new infrastructure, so that's been really helpful. We do a lot of education outreach to boards such as yourselves and planning commissions, township boards and councils. We started GIS, which we still continue at Tri-County Planning, and we've started to do some watershed assessment over the last decade. We've gone back to that. So with all of this comes the media. Lately we've had more media than we've usually had in water, but some of the spin-offs, these were some of the media messages that we worked with. These are all places that we have put water messages for our local drinking water. We've done television, radio spots, we've done community groups, fairs. 1-2 year period, I did 60 civic groups in 2 years. So we really tried to do a lot of outreach and keep the leaders in our community and our citizens up to date on what we're doing. We had some really mixed results. It's very expensive. It's very hard to brand. It's very hard to make it interesting, usually. And it's very hard to compete with an increasing media presence. It's hard to get the good message out. It's hard to say, you know what, you have a great water resource. You have really good people running your utilities, and you have a solid resource. So, but there's been some kind of fun things that we've done, and some more spin-offs that have continued. We created a curriculum with Western Michigan. We worked with them and created a college curriculum for wellhead protection for emerging planners and land use experts. We did a children's water festival for 4th and 5th and 6th graders at Michigan State University. We had about 40,000 kids go through the program. That's now been merged into the Michigan State University Science Fair. And we built an 8x7 groundwater model that's permanently installed in Impression 5. So if you ever go in the water room there, that's installed there, and did some training with their staff. So they've kind of come up with 10 of the best of what we think are good activities to train students. So we've done some fun hands-on messages and tried to really be leaders in environmental education, especially as it applies to local leadership. It's not been all fun and games, and there's always the nitty-gritty and the legal aspects of it. We did an abandoned well program, which Meridian Township participated in, and we closed abandoned wells. We have identified potential contaminant sources so that when our planners want to make some decisions or our utilities want to make decisions, we have the mapping capabilities to go out and do circumference searches and see what's out there and what they might want to be concerned about or look at. And we have looked at all of your ordinances, all your master plans, all your building codes, and made recommendations that Meridian Township has implemented over the last 15-20 years. Actually, Harmony and I have a meeting on February 16th to talk about that again and kind of see where you are at and if there's any tweaks that you need to make to any of your programming that she would like to bring back to you. So our focus has always been prevention versus remediation because it's so much cheaper. We really work to integrate the programming so it's not a standalone way to protect your drinking water. Like I said, it's in your master plan, it's in your ordinances, it's in your building codes. So it's just part of how you do business here every day at Meridian Township. We've had a lot of spin-off relationships. If you're familiar with the Greater Lansing Regional Committee for Stormwater Protection, they began meeting in '99 and were a direct spin-off those relationships from the Groundwater Management Board. And that was in response to some of the Phase 2 stormwater requirements. They have been extremely busy. Erin Campbell from our staff has worked very hard for the last decade, and you now have post-construction manuals and watershed plans for the Red Cedar and the Grand River, and they created the Middle Grand River Organization of Watersheds, which is sort of an umbrella group for all of the local watershed groups. So they have 3 approved watershed plans. They have implementation plans that we've put out for funding, and like I said, they created MGROW. And also, if any of you have seen the Pollution Isn't Pretty campaign, that looks like this. We did a lot of billboards and news and radio. And so that's been sort of the answer to our frustration of how do you make media, how do you come up with a unified message. So we have people throughout the 3 counties, organizations such as conservation districts, everyone's using the same message. So what have we accomplished? We have really improved our infrastructure. We've seen significant savings. We've done education. We have 15 communities with groundwater and surface water plans. made these changes to your site plan reviews and your ordinances, and put GIS into place, and it's something that everyone uses on a day-to-day basis, which 25 years ago, we were one of the only organizations that had it, and closed the abandoned wells. All that to say, it has not been without drama, because we certainly have had some drama. Usually it's, misinformation. Again, it's hard to get that message out there. A lack of funding, strained relationships between adjacent communities, and sometimes it may not be water that's at issue, but it rolls over into it. The aging infrastructure is something that we've dealt with, we're going to continue to deal with. It's not going to go away. Elections and retirements, we lose a lot of historic knowledge. Yada, yada, yada. So that takes us to today, and where are we at? It's kind of what's old is new again. We've kind of gone back to our roots in 208 water quality planning. We're doing a lot from a watershed basis, really looking at, in the state and federal directives are much more holistic for looking at the entire hydrologic cycle, not just in different pieces. So that's really refreshing. And we've got a lot of really smart people that are doing the right thing in this region. We have a lot of communication. Our local utilities meet at least monthly. They're at the table together for one reason or another. And they really do a good job, I think, mentoring one another and sharing information and sharing their resources. So we looked at all this and we said, we really want to do a self-evaluation. We want to know, are we efficient? Are we coordinated? Are we redundant? Are we missing anything? Are we prepared? So the plan was that we were just going to do a one-time gap analysis of regional water policies and programs. This was just going to be a one-time project. And I don't know if any of you have ever seen this meme about the Titanic, and it talks about whether Rose and Jack could have both been on the door. Did they both really need to die? And they show all these different ways that perhaps they both could have lived. And that's what we want to avoid. We don't want to be the top left-hand corner. We don't want to say, wow, we only thought about this one way and we missed something. So this whole exercise was to try to say, okay, what could we possibly be missing? And in our strength lies in our differences and not in our similarities. And this started on the first day when we started talking about this as staff, and it was myself and Aaron and Harmony. And how do you tell this story? Because I wanted to do it in words. You just can't have enough paragraphs. And Harmony wants pictures. Harmony thinks if you can tell, if I could have my 1,000 words for one of Harmony's pictures. So we went back and Erin, she loves her some Excel spreadsheets. Erin has spreadsheets for everything. So again, it was, everyone saw this project differently right from the beginning. So this was funded by DEQ. It was a Wellhead grant to the East Lansing Meridian Water and Sewer Authority. We coordinated it and wrote it in just evaluating the effectiveness of wellhead protection and groundwater, and try to figure out what were our goals and recommendations going to be. So it was a unique effort. This was the first time we had brought together regional experts in all these areas. And we had groundwater, drinking water, land use, surface water, wastewater. We had lots of subcommittee meetings and involved every part of the water world we could bring to the table that was local. And really looked at how is everybody working together to protect local water resources, because we get a lot of that. Well, everybody's doing groundwater. Aren't these people doing surface water too? What's USGS doing? What's EPA doing? Why are you doing this? So we wanted to make sure we didn't have that redundancy. And we looked at everything from ag to wetlands. How were each system operated individually? How were they interconnected? How were they interdependent? And we are almost 100% dependent on groundwater for our drinking water, but all of the water resources make a difference on how high that quality is. So it matters. We had over 60 people that met over a 6-8 month period to talk about this. Everybody, like I said, from greening to ag, the state weighed in on it, USGS, Natural Resource Conservation Service. We really went out there and went to people. Some we've had long-term relationships with, and some we never work with. So these evolved into our key elements. What were our water protection activities? Where do we have policy and programming gaps? What were our best management practices? Where were our opportunities for complementary activities? Where were the redundancies? And what were going to be the long-term recommendations? So what evolved was, this is your table of contents. And so we have groundwater and public water supplies, municipal wastewater, stormwater, residential and ag, watershed management, water quality, the blue economy. And and we did a glossary, and we found out, which really wasn't a surprise, it just as a continual reminder, we speak in acronyms. So we have 2.5 pages of acronyms. So if you ever are going through that, just go right to the back. So we did it in a 2-page spread. And so this happens to be the groundwater spread. It's 2 pages facing. It just gives synopsises of like some of the key groundwater and drinking water programs that we have in the region, identifies gaps and concerns, and who are the key resources. What agencies are key to groundwater and drinking water in our 3 counties? And you can just see, we talked about our drinking water consortium, water regionalization, the aquifer study I discussed, wellhead protection. And then again, just kind of went through some of the things like the time of sale ordinances, the groundwater audit tool, just things that have been really key to our programming. And then each chapter also has a spreadsheet that looks like this that goes through all of those elements. With the environmental permits checklist, what is the highest possible standard? What are the deficiencies? What are the resources available? What could you recommend for sustaining it? What would be your actions? Evaluations, timeline, is there any money available? How likely is it? What do we think it would cost? So the final product was a multi-jurisdictional water strategy. And we looked at everything from water quality and quantities and delivery in all areas of natural and made water systems. So we looked at, rivers and streams as well as pipes in the ground. And what we learned, we have accomplished a great deal, a lot more than I think, this is the first time we've ever put it all into one place. We have really good communication and cooperation in this region in water resources and in water facilities. There's not very much overlap. We learned that the recession really cleaned that up. There is not a lot of redundancy. There are not 2 people doing the same job in many places, and we really couldn't find any places we would recommend that needed to be eliminated. The 2 biggest opportunities we came up with were coordinated testing, both for groundwater and surface water. There is no single place where you could go and say, I want to know what groundwater testing has been done here. You would have to call DEQ, and you would have to call the health department, and you would have to call EPA and maybe some consultants. And so we're trying to figure out how can we better bring all of those databases together and interface with them. And so we actually have a grant this year to do that. And just to start that conversation, we don't have enough to create the database, but maybe it look like a scope of work at what it could look like. And surface water is doing the same thing because there isn't a real great direction on where water is being tested. Is that being duplicated? And then again, the education and the messaging and the marketing, that really needs to be cooperative, and that really can be done by multi-jurisdictions and multi-agencies. So with that, I will open it up to any questions. This link on the bottom goes to our website, and the report that I just discussed is on there, so you can find it. It's in a PDF. It'll be a lot easier to read, I'm sure, than that screen, but you can go through it at your leisure. And Harmony was very involved at Tri-County in putting this together, and if she can't answer any of your questions, I would be happy to.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Questions?
Are there any significant threats or problems with the water quality in the region?
Wow, that's a really broad question.
Yeah.
I think there's always broad threats. I think we have done a really good job of identifying them and continue to monitor them. I mean, you don't know what you don't know. I guess that's the answer to that. So, as it stands today, I think we're doing a pretty good job of knowing and managing what is out there. But like I said, what's unknown, I can't predict. It's kind of a non-answer, but.
I didn't see any mention of one of the county drain commissions. Are they involved in this?
They are involved more in the watershed programming, in the stormwater programming, than the groundwater programming. But they are on many of our committees.
Ned, you've always got a question.
I was seeing if he was alphabetizing or he was going to give them to me numerically.
Well, let me jump in while he's searching
Sure.
for that. So you did do some gap analysis, and obviously there's always something that we can do more of. And one of the things that I've been hearing about very generally, and does seem to come up in your report, has to do with the age of our infrastructure. And you know, personally, yeah, I own a house and it's 50 years old, and not all of the water delivery and infrastructure was necessarily engineered to last for 100 years or 200 years. But my understanding is that communities like ours do have infrastructure that's quite old, and we know from our roads that stuff doesn't last forever. So I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on that issue, what you found, and how we should be thinking about that.
We should be thinking about it when we're tearing up our roads. We looked at it very broadly because all of your communities are different and all of you have had different replacement policies over the years. So when you're looking at this from multi-jurisdictional, we didn't dig that deep, in, no pun intended, into exactly who needed to replace what. There was discussion about having a coordinated conversation about funding and what would that mean and what would the price tag be for the region. The water utilities have and continue to do some pretty in-depth asset management and evaluations on a utility by utility basis. So they know, they know what they have, and I think all of the water utility managers around here are very aware of where their weakest links probably are. I mean, they know where their water mains break. They know where they have issues. I don't know what it's going to take, and I hesitate, and I'm not being flippant. I mean, it may take an act of Congress because I don't know how they're going to fund it. It's just going to be billions and billions of dollars. So, and it's not just drinking water; it's also wastewater, and as you mentioned, it's roads. So, there is a strong will, I think, among these water professionals, though, to have a coordinated conversation about what that might look like. So.
Well, I wasn't able to see all of Mr. Dugan.
Yes,
right?
Clyde Dugan.
Presentation to the township board, but the portion that I did see, I thought was very impressive. I thought he did a really good job of presenting the current status and the programs that are going on, and the sorts of monitoring and testing that is being done on the water supplies for Meridian Township. And I was interested when you showed the photograph that he's been in this business, in this area for decades. And some of what I've picked up from recent presentations on the issues in Flint is that these are really complicated systems, and they're not all that predictable because we don't have perfect information about the infrastructure. We don't know exactly which pipes are where, and we don't necessarily. It seems like there's a fair amount of art to it, and it's important to have people who are managing the system be so familiar with it that they're not surprised as easily, maybe. So I thought that was very interesting, and I found that reassuring that the township benefits from having that long experience and expertise. And I also like to make plugs whenever I can for home TV, because we have really a luxury of having those presentations available to the viewing public on demand. So if anybody who's watching this evening has specific questions about how your water is being treated and tested, that video is available for you to view, and I think you'll find it very, very informative.
And that was just last evening, so.
Correct.
Yeah, and you also have on your website, he has put some frequently asked questions, I believe, and some key talking points about some of those things as well. So it's available in both places. Clyde had a long history with the Lansing Board of Water and Light and retired for 7 years and then came back to East Lansing Meridian. You have a jewel there. He is not only very well respected locally but nationally, and has been very involved in the National American Water Works Association, and he's a trustee on the Michigan American Water Works Association currently. So he's got a lot of knowledge, and he's extremely well respected. So.
You mentioned that sometimes it's hard to get people to pay attention because they just take it all for granted. So I teach a freshman class on green chemistry at MSU, and I will say that a couple of the things that have impressed me the most about, in brief, educating my students about how chemistry is all around us was taking them to the East Lansing Meridian water plant and also taking them to the wastewater plant. Partly because until you actually have seen those places, you have no idea what the scale, I mean, there are giant rivers in effect running through both of those places. And so, we have our little faucets that we turn on and off. But the students, for example, having gone to the wastewater plant, they came back and they said, I'm not going to do the wash, rinse, repeat thing, and so forth, because they saw the suds in the final water that was ready to be released into the world again. Mm-hmm. And those kinds of messages, I wish we could take all our citizens through that kind of experience, just so they appreciate both the complexity and the scale of these resources that we simply take for granted, and also, the people who are making these systems run mm-hmm. in the background, so mm-hmm. that we can take them for granted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they're engineers and they're chemists, and they're
right.
testing it every hour, and it's quite a production. It's pretty impressive. So
to come back to a topic that sort of keeps on popping up in the Environmental Commission, sort of as we ask ourselves what our role is, and also prompted by the fact that it's the beginning of February and it's raining outside instead of what it should be doing. I'm just wondering, regarding sort of climate change and just the way that things are evolving. For example, we don't spend, this year evidently, we're not going to spend, 3 months with the ground frozen.
You never know.
And well, all I'm saying is, it's not. There is reason to think that things are changing, and I'm just wondering if there are parts of the dialogue that are trying to account for that, or are there issues that you don't? Do you think that this raises issues or not?
It was briefly raised and determined that for the purposes of this report, for local policy and for the utility, and it really wasn't something this group was ready to address. They didn't really have the expertise at the table, and really didn't have the expertise at the table. That was it. They weren't ready to address it and didn't see it as a pressing local policy at this time, based on the direction they were all given for their positions, for their jobs.
Okay, and in parallel with that is, I think at the wastewater plant they told us, I can't remember the number of kilowatts or megawatts, but one of the gigantic expenses there was simply energy. Mm-hmm. For all the pumping of pulling water out of the ground, moving water around, treating it, and so forth. And that, of course, is always a topic that people are interested in. So do you sort of try to consider the energy aspects of mm-hmm. the overall, essentially the water delivery and treatment?
Yes, and I can tell you, I'm actually the program chair for the Michigan section AWWA this year for their fall conference, and energy is very topical. And it is something, when they are speaking to vendors on new pumps in different parts of the plant, that they look at how energy efficient it is. Is it worth replacing this pump for this increased efficiency, and those types of issues. So, and it sounds like Meridian Township overall has been very sensitive to that as an energy issue. And I think that your water and wastewater operators and managers are along the same tracks. They understand the value of it. And as an industry overall, they're working to make it more energy efficient, because it's a huge, huge resource that they're using.
I guess that's enough questions for me.
When Tri-County Regional Planning Commission looks at transportation issues, there's some projections that get done for future traffic expectations. And it sounds like what you're saying is that in the field of water, that there isn't sort of a parallel process where a projection to 2025 or 2050 is being done. Is that right?
We did one, like I said, in the early 90s was the last time we did it officially. And we have begun that dialogue a couple years ago about, because we have a Mid-Michigan Water Authority, which Clyde happens to chair, that brings these utilities, and they have had some discussions about redoing that study and seeing where we're at and what the projections might be for the next 20 to 30 years. But we just have to get enough communities on board to do it and to pay for it. So we did it as a cost share basis on population last time. I think it was $225,000 last time, and we had 20 communities that each paid their portion based on their population. So the Board of Water and Light has to buy in because they're about 50% of it, and to do some of those things. And they've just had other priorities lately, and I think they'll get there. I think we'll do it again. And I think part of it too is they all have so much asset management data that they didn't collect for themselves back then, that they have a much better feel for it than maybe they did 25 years ago, that they can share. And everything's automated and everything's mapped and everything's in GIS, and so it's just easier to find those resources.
And would that be part of the climate action plan that was discussed, that you were mentioning? Sort of.
Well, we really haven't gotten into any detailed discussion, but just looking briefly at the East Lansing plan, they had 5 areas: waste management, water management, energy efficiency, renewable energy, and transportation. So yeah, water management, I think, is an important part.
Great. Any other questions for Christine? Well, thank you once again for coming to present. I can see the URL there. If anyone has more questions or wants to see the entire report, they can go there and get what they need.
All right, well, thank you for having me.
Thank you very much.